kids. You see this in the pre-K, addition to pre-K in our school system, is to deliver more services to our kids, more education, and there's a drive for that. So to think that that we may be able to cut the budget, there's no appetite to go there. If anything, it's the opposite. So I think that is important to understand, or to have that in the back of your mind as you discuss how we finance the school system. So, and then I'll yield.
Well, one thing, if the funding formula was to change, it would not take any money away from funding the school district. So it would only shift what percentages came from the 4 different towns. But my thought is, if we come up with a proposal, I would like to answer your question and say, within that same referendum question, to go to the district voters, to say, if the funding formula passes, then it would not be implemented until the town of Newry voted to stop their withdrawal effort. So whether it got approved or not, and if it did get approved, then Newry's going to stop their process before it would go into effect.
David, I think we've reviewed that. Is that language that could be put into the referendum?
My recollection, Mike and I talked about that earlier, is that our attorney has said that that would be seen as, it's 2 terms, as a condition rather than an additional, as long as you only talk about valuation and student population, it requires a majority of the district overall. If you add a 3rd component to that, then it requires passing in each town. According to our attorney, that would be a condition as opposed to a 3rd component. So my understanding from talking to him is that that could be something that you consider. And as a matter of fact, I think that was something that was discussed earlier at the board level.
Okay, thank you.
I really think if you look at the history in Newry in the last 3.5 years, there's been 3 votes whether to look into the withdrawal process, and they've heavily been in favor of looking into it. But there's also been 2 votes of the funding formula change. And those have been favorably very high as to, yes, let's get it changed. And I sincerely believe if it was to get implemented and changed, that Newry would vote to stop the process. And that's, to me, the most important thing, to keep this district together.
Yes, sir.
So I could speak for what the sense is, no vote of the Newry Select Board. We talked about this in the meeting, and there's been some pressure, not the right word, but there's been some consideration. We've been asked to, would we come out and say that we would recommend that the withdrawal process stops if the funding formula passed? At our last meeting or the meeting before, we said, yeah, we would do that once we hear what the funding formula is. So the Newry Select Board is poised and ready to support, to ask the voters of Newry to recommend that we stop the withdrawal process if we can get the funding formula changed. I will get back on my soapbox, which you have all heard before, but I really believe it's important enough to say it again. Easy to me. You folks have one thing. You got one person. You got one group you need to deal with, and it's the students. You got to take care of the students. I couldn't agree with you more myself. There is nothing more important than the town does than educate its kids. What else do we do? Throw out our trash, pave some roads. There's nothing more important we do. You guys, your job here tonight is to think of what's best for the kids. Here comes my soapbox. You've all heard it before. You can probably tell it to me. This is about Newry feeling like we are treated differently. We are. SAD 44 is treated differently. Newbury takes the brunt of it. SAD 44, the funding formula favors all the other towns. We're not asking, nobody is asking to not pay for education. We're more than willing to pay our fair share. The question is our fair share. It got so bad that it went to the state legislature, and our legislator proposed that, no, you guys can't leave. Well, that was fuel to the fire, and that I think changed it to a lot of folks when this was just about withdrawal and is it really fair and what's the funding formula. When that came to a head and it was, no, Newry, you can't leave. You got plenty of money, shut up, keep paying. That got a lot of people very riled up. So I think as I have since the beginning of this, I think the funding formula is the opportunity to say, okay, Newry, we've leveled the playing field. We've taken that off the table. Now do you want to withdraw? And I would love to see us get to that, and clearly I'm supporting that we come up with something of a refunding formula that we can put in front of the voters one last time. The last vote was very, very close, and what wasn't discussed in the history of all of this was there was a public hearing that got moved because of weather. The public hearing got moved to the point that there was no time to print what happened to the public hearing in the newspaper. I don't think people knew what was going on. I really believe that's true. I think after this time, people have got to know what's going on, and I think the vote will be different.
I think we'll have one public hearing instead of two.
And hopefully there won't be a snowstorm as much as I like snow.
Don't count on that one, Jim.
Yeah, right, and we'll be able to get something in the paper.
Yes, sir. So, I pay taxes in 3 towns, Murray, Greenwood, and Belleville. I wear sort of a unique hat where I do a lot of different businesses. And Marcel, I read your point, but I sit here as a taxpayer who funds the school happily. I went through this district, sat in this library, my kids have gone through the district. What I think needs to be discussed is, what happens to this district and this school if Newry pulls out, right? So as a taxpayer, and I've discussed this with Marcel at other meetings, as a taxpayer, if Newry pulls out, we're losing, David, and you can help me with the numbers if you don't mind, $2.83 million?
Yeah, somewhere between 2.5 and 3.
$2.5 and $3 million, okay? The chairman of the school board said schools are gonna close down. We're gonna have to consolidate students into less buildings, at the risk of Woodstock, who has a very nice school, then saying, we want our school, we're gonna pull out. It's gonna devastate us. And I told Marcel this, and I appreciate his efforts, and I know he's working on behalf of the students. But are we willing to go to the casino and roll the dice on this district? Because that's what it boils down to. The other 3 towns, are they willing to roll the dice and say, we're not gonna help Newry, and we're gonna roll the dice that they're gonna vote to stay in the district? I've been a supporter of Newry because I think they are paying too much. I pay about $60,000 roughly, changes because I sell property and buy property, about $60,000 in taxes between the 3 towns. Greenwood's looking at an increase, David, of what roughly if the district pulls out, if Newry pulls out?
Greenwood?
Yes.
Greenwood's would be marginal.
Right, and Bethel?
Well, no, I shouldn't say it'd be marginal. It would not be marginal if they pulled out. It would be marginal if there was a change to the
Correct,
formula
but
like
if
we had before.
Newry pulled out though, let's talk about hard numbers.
Yeah.
What would Greenwood's rough increase be?
Ballpark would be somewhere around $300,000 probably, if you look at like 10% overall of what they're funding, 10 to 13.
And Bethel? Bethel's tax
About a
increase?
third of that.
About a third.
Yeah.
So,
And Woodstock, a little less than that.
Marcel, when you wonder, and I know your biggest concern is, will the other 3 towns pick up the difference? Am I characterizing that properly?
You're correct,
Right.
Ron, I
Right,
just,
so let me answer that as a taxpayer, as a pretty major taxpayer, you got a couple of them in the room. We're businessmen, right? So, would we be willing to take a chance on a 30, 40, 45% tax increase with Newry pulling out? Or will we be better off taking the deal and saying, it may be an 8 to 10% increase with the 85-15?
Yeah, my numbers actually were off, Ron, because it would really be more like a 50% increase based on schools for
Unless we
most
make
towns.
major cuts in the school,
Right.
right? So you really have to ask yourselves, right? Are we willing in the other 3 towns to roll the dice that Newry won't leave and we can hold this all together, which I don't think it'll happen. I think Newry will leave. My money's on Newry leaving if we don't give them a modest break, which I see this as a modest break. I promised Marcel I would support your school budgets within reason as a taxpayer. I will pay the extra 8 to 10% because I'm a smart businessman. I don't wanna take a chance on 50%. Alan runs in Bethlehem, I can't imagine what his 50% would do. I just don't understand how there's even a thought of rolling the dice on the backs of our students. I will support the increase, but I don't understand how we can even take a chance on rolling the dice.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Ron, for your comments. I'm actually speaking for the leadership in Woodstock now, okay? The leadership sitting there. Before we actually started all this problem solving, we sat down and said, okay, we need to have a philosophy before we go into this problem solving. What is the philosophy that our leadership in Woodstock has? And basically what that leadership was, and we sat down and took a look at the philosophy was, is that, A, what is fair and equitable? That's number 1, okay? What is fair and equitable for everybody? Now, Marcel, we have a different philosophy. The current funding formula is equitable in its system right now. But the question would be, is it fair for every individual within that funding formula? That's the question that we actually put up on our screen. I think the second thing is that for us, are we willing to roll the dice in the town of Woodstock to go ahead and actually take a look and hoping and praying that they don't pull out? We wanted to take a look at what the financial impact would be if we went ahead and actually met them with a funding formula that had less impact, financial impact to Woodstock, but kept the district solvent. Because we're in fear that the district would not be solvent. With 2.5 to 2.8 million, there's no way that we could see the district would be. And then Woodstock would have to make some tough and unpopular decisions, for sure, which would impact us more financially down the road than actually taking a look at the funding formula and stretching it out. That is the philosophy that we looked at, was as fair and equitable, keeping the district solvent, keeping our communities coherent, keeping them, I use the word esprit de corps together, and at the same time, what is that worth to us in Woodstock to be doing that, and how much of an impact would that be to the taxpayers? We crunched the numbers, and we actually took a look, and I can tell you that we actually did took a look at an 8-year process, and we took a look at a 10-year. Okay, when we get into, proposing a draft proposal, I'm gonna make some recommendations off this. But I'm just gonna give you one generic 10-year breakdown for the town of Woodstock. If we went 10 years, and the breakdown would look something like this. The first 2 years would be 95.5, then there would be a 3 and 4th year, that would be a 90-10. 5th, 6th, and 7th year would be a 90-10, 3 years would be 90-10. The 6th and 7th year would be 88-12. The 8th year, well, it'd be 3 years at 88-12, sorry. And then 9 and 10, if we went out 10 years, would get us to that 85-15 mark. If we stretch that only for the town of Woodstock, crunching the numbers, that overall increase in 10 years. Now remember, we don't know what budgets are going to be from year to year. We understand it. Your town budget's going to be different. Oxford County taxes, their budget's going to be different. We understand that. But we only had what we had to base it on this year's figures, on those 3 Oxford County town and education budget. That would have been an $87,000 increase over 10 years to the town of Woodstock, which amounted to a 41-cent mill rate increase over 10 years. So if we're looking at this in leadership at Woodstock, answering Ron's concern, which is ours, what is that worth to us to assure that we have stability for 10 years, knowing that the financial impact, at least we're thinking, is minimal, to go ahead and actually take a look at keeping our district solvent and keeping our district coherent and esprit de corps, so to speak. And we believe that. And that's how we ended in this, with the philosophy that we started with, and that's how we ended up with this.
Thank you. Yes.
I just wanted to thank the Bethel Select Board for appointing me to the committee, and I'm appreciating this conversation here. I too believe that the current formula serves our district in Bethel and the community best. We're really one community, one economy, one unit. And a rhetorical question is, would we really be here tonight if the ski area and the related development was never built? And a couple other thoughts in regards to fairness. State says we have to pay for public education. We all have to pay for it. Whether we have 10 kids in the district or no kids in the district, whether you're in one neighborhood or one end of the district, and we're one unit, so they share that across the whole district. And the way we have it now, you can't get any more fair how it is now. My rate is the same as your rate, is the same as your rate. We all pay the same rate. My little house that's fallen apart at whatever it is, $175,000, pays the same rate as somebody else in Newry or Woodstock and Greenwood. So I think that's something to think about when we say fairness. And we're one unit. The state has recognized us as one unit through the special law. And saying that that's calling Newry out, I really have to have you think of something that most of the kids in our state, you have to check the numbers, I think it's close to 60%, are educated by one unit. So I'm not sure how that makes Newry different. So I just offer these thoughts out there for you. And another thought is, would you be making the same decisions here tonight if you didn't have the threat of Newry pulling out over you? Would you be making the same decisions? So I think that needs to be thought about and kind of mulled over. And what attracted me to participating on this committee after get another vote was maybe if we finally get to a point where we could have conversation and discussion. And I think this is good, and I appreciate it, and I look forward to digesting this material. I'm one of the newbies here, and listening and participating in further discussion.
Yes, Brett.
I think the agreement with Nora is much better than pulling out by a long shot. And also, I think new things in education usually are not bad. People spoke about they all had added things, but about 99% of the time, that is a good thing.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Yes, Alan Connors from the Bethel Inn and Bethel resident. Michelle, I completely understand the argument. It's how it works. And it is, when you look at it like that, fair for all. If somebody with a $200,000 house is paying the same exact amount with somebody from another town with a $200,000 house. But what I'm afraid of is that Newry has already basically made up their mind. That argument that you made it's a good one, but I think that unfortunately Newry's not going with that. And I think that our representatives' attempt to kind of really handcuff them has stirred up even more. And the reality that we're in right now is it's not, as I think as pure as that. It's really what happens if they pull out. And if they pull out, and if things stay the same, Ron's taxes go up, everyone's taxes go up. 50% in Bethel, that's a lot of money. We are here because that's a lot of money for us to deal with, and we don't want to have to face that. We would rather have something more reasonable, 10, 12, 15% over 10 years. But I think if that reality actually set in, this room would be overflowing with people that would be upset with that new 50% increase in taxes. You'd have much smaller businesses on tighter budgets here, especially in Bethel, coming on the heels of a similar issue with the sewer service increases last year and the year before. So I think that the board really has to look at where are we, what is likely to happen, and if there's no discussion, no compromise, I gotta take what Jim said seriously and say, they're riled up, and they're gonna do something, and if we don't offer something first, and show some goodwill, I think that we're not gonna be dealing with a similar situation, we're not gonna have a school like we have it today. It's going to be quite different, and you can have all these scenarios and figure out where it might land, but it's going to be quite different than now, and I think that we all are satisfied with the way it's working now, and the cost-sharing formula is the best way for us to really get from here to there and maintain what we have and be able to work with increases that we can live with. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, at the last board meeting where the board decided not to send the compromise funding formula back to the voters, David, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you made the statement that there's no way you're going to provide the same level of education should that happen, should Newry withdraw. It's just not going to happen. You take out $2.8 million, it's not happening. Number two, David, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think over 60% of the kids right now are on free hot lunch. So what's that telling you about the local economy? And number three, at that same meeting, there's an effort being put forth with the school right now to actually send food home in kids' backpacks over the weekend so that they have something to eat. So the question is, whether you own a home, whether you rent or whatever, those families that are living on the edge, you pass along large tax increases, there's no way they can handle it. It's not possible. So this compromise, when we started the petition was to send back the latest compromise funding formula back to votes. It failed by 19 votes, 10 people. The public hearing was held on Thursday. The vote was the following Tuesday. There was no way to educate anybody. If you send it back and you can educate the voters that if Newry withdraw, Woodstock sees a 50% increase in their taxes. Bethel, I think, is 35% increase in their taxes, and Greenwood is 25 or plus % increase in the taxes. Pretty sure how the vote's going to go. Forget the taxes. Let's make sure we educate our kids, because as I said at the meeting we had at the Bethel Inn, if this conversation had been had 3 years ago prior to my son, daughter-in-law, 2 granddaughters contemplating moving here, I would have told them, don't come here. Because there's no way your kids are going to be able to get educated if Newry withdraw, as David, as you had said. There's no way to keep the current educational programs together, let alone expand pre-K or anything else like that. This is a good deal for everybody. Let's send it back to the voters and go. Thank you.
I just want to say too, if anybody noticed me on my phone, it wasn't that I was ignoring anything else. I was looking for the email that I had gone back and forth with the attorney about Bob's question about adding that phrase. So that's just in case you thought I was checking the Red Sox score or something like that.
Did you get the answer?
I couldn't find it.
No. All right. Yeah, I'll okay? Yes.
I just wanted to make 2 points. The first is, I think the committee might be closer than they think. Like, if the second time around it was within 19 votes, I'm a voter, I vote all the time, and I have to be honest, I didn't understand the vote enough, so I left it blank. I mean, I just felt irresponsible voting for something that I didn't understand, so I just not get too discouraged. Like, we're talking about 19 votes, I was one of them, and it could have gone either way. And then the second point is, I've heard numbers of what would happen if Newry pulled out, and I'm just wondering if someone could give me concretely what would happen. What happens to voters in Greenwood, Greenwood, Woodstock, and Bethel if we pass this? Like, what is the reality for me as a taxpayer in Greenwood? Is it minimal? Is it really going to change my life, or am I not really going to care? That's like, that part is not very clear to me.
I do have.
Okay, we'll get to it later, but that's.
Right,
Yeah.
I figured they would come a little later.
Okay.
The piece you need to understand is we don't have a crystal ball. So we're dealing with just sort of known figures and trying to sort of stretch them over time. But we can give you at least a picture
Yeah.
what that would be. The other thing that has not been mentioned, and I hesitate, to mention it, only because I don't have an answer for you, is, say Nuri does, say you change your funding formula, and Nuri still pulls out. Are you better off with a new funding formula for all three of the towns that are left? What would the impact will be? Would it be as great as the impact is if it stays? And didn't try to calculate that, have not looked at that. But, I mean, that's another consideration, you know, and I'm not suggesting other than it's a consideration of what's the impact if Nuri were to leave. We kind of know what, I think people have talked quite a bit about, what's the impact if Nuri pulls out with the way things are currently funded. That's what you've heard for figures. If you had a different funding formula, will it shift some of that? And how so? And it may be worse. It may be better off if I don't do anything with it, but I think it's only fair to raise it as a consideration. Yes, Bob?
If you was to put that condition into
The motion?
another funding formula, then if Nuri votes not to stop the process, nothing changes from what's going on today. And if Nuri gets out, nothing has changed from what's going on today.
Right. And that would be something, if the committee, when you sort of get to a point where you think about, do you want to propose, that's one of the things, yes or, sort of yes or no, what it is that a condition you want to add? And we would need to get a legal opinion. I mean, there's no point putting something out that you waste the money on.
I'm gonna go get a legal opinion, you guys.
These people who work with these guys have personal contacts with them. I used to be that way, not anymore. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say I am a school board director, but I also have been on the Nuri withdrawal committee for, I think it's been 30 years, or has felt like that. And, you know, everything what everyone has said about, you know, in 2005, we didn't get to vote on it, the state just shoved it down our throats, blah, 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 you know, and the evaluations of Nuri is huge, you know, we have so much money, which is great, we paid 2.9 million and we only have like 24-ish students, you know, so the people in Nuri will, you know, looking all that, and then when the state just said, you know, pretty much, you know, we had no voice, and that's what they're, you know, like they, my husband has said too, people are riled up about. But the atmosphere when we meet as a withdrawal committee, and Gary can speak for himself, is that if we had some kind of olive branch, this would be awesome. And we could bring it to the voters. And I really think that, especially somehow if we could put the stipulation in that we would stop withdrawal, because I certainly would stop it, I would vote to stop it, this would really work.
Thank you. I'll come up here and then I'll go back, okay? I want to give everyone as much opportunity to talk about it. I don't want anyone to feel we're going to cram something, you know. I've been on the receiving end of that. It's never, you don't leave feeling hurt. Yes, sir.
As an individual who's been on this process the third time, I'm hearing that the end goal is to try to prevent a withdrawal. I fully agree with that. What I have heard personally in attempt number 1, then attempt number 2, was that there was a lot of concern that there was no agreement that if we went this route, that this withdrawal process would not continue. I think perhaps that the end result of the vote, if it gets to the voter, might have a totally different result if there was a condition in the vote that stipulated that if it were approved, that the withdrawal process would end at least during the time period that the agreement was in place. Whether that is an 8-year process or a 10-year process, people want to have assurance that they're not simply agreeing to increase their own taxes and yet not have an assurance that the process for withdrawal would continue. So I would support an effort, if it's legally available to us, to have some sort of language in that vote to the voters that stipulates that very same language. I think it's a reasonable compromise, and perhaps we need to discuss whether it is a 10-year proposal or an 8-year proposal, which is the second time around, and we take it from there.
Just, Marcel, you had your hand up.
If anyone else hasn't spoken, I defer to them before I
Okay.
speak again.
I think I got a really quick answer to that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
If you don't mind, it may help the room.
Yeah.
If you stop and think for a second, and I wish somebody was here that had the numbers of the last referendum vote. Newry people spoke. Newry, I believe, and don't quote me exactly, I think it's 80% of the voters in Newry said, yes, Greenwood, Woodstock, Bethel, we will take you a deal. 80% of the people in Newry, roughly 80, give or take 2, said yes. It takes 2/3 vote to withdraw. So if 80% of them said, yes, we'll take you a deal, haven't they spoken? And I grant it's not official, but it's going to be pretty hard pressed to take what was 80% that said, yes, thank you very much for the olive branch, very nice word, thank you for the olive branch, we will take you a deal. My concern of, and David might have an answer in a minute, my concern of making the condition, which makes it 3, which might make it have to pass in all the towns, Woodstock overwhelmingly voted no for the deal. And the Woodstock selectmen might know better than I, but Newry offset, I think Bethel said no, Greenwood and Newry said yes, and Woodstock said no. So I would caution us to make it pass in every town, because if that was the case, 2 towns would have voted it down. Whether it was lack of knowledge, lack of understanding. But if you think about it from a logical standpoint, that's how I'm trying to think about this. Newry voters said, we will take you a deal, other partners.
Okay. And I have the numbers. David had sent them to me in an email, and I found my email. Newry, the vote was 123 in favor, 41 opposed. So that, just so that clarifies that point. Yes, sir, you had.
All right, back in February, when this was brought back up to the school board to start the process again, it was brought up from the withdrawal committee asking to put this back to the voters, and that the withdrawal committee would recommend stopping the process at that point. So the Newry Withdrawal Committee did ask that you bring this back up in February, which was turned down. So I don't know how much more you want from the Withdrawal Committee. You know, we said that we would recommend that the process be stopped.
I remember now, I think the lawyer almost positively said that we couldn't add that language. I think that's where we got that from. The lawyer told us we couldn't.
Which language are you talking about?
That you
Excuse me.
couldn't add.
I got Bill on the phone.
Okay, so it's coming.
We'll have an answer, sure.
I think that's what happened.
Yes.
And that's what created that vote.
Yes, sir.
Just, I want to speak to Norman's point. At the public hearing prior to the last vote, it was presented in my mind incorrectly. It was presented as an 8-year deal. That word got out to the communities where people were thinking, if I vote for this, it's an 8-year deal, what happens at the end of those 8 years? It's not an 8-year or a 10-year deal. It is a phase-in of the percentages over the course of X number of years, and then after that, it stays there. There's no deal there see what I'm saying, Norman? I mean, there were people that, when we were doing the petition drive, I collected 124 signatures. I talked to a lot of people. A lot of people voted against it because they said, why would I vote for something where in 8 years we're gonna be doing this all over again? And that's not what it was about. It was, this is the compromise funding formula, and this is what it's gonna be afterwards.
I don't disagree with that.
I know, I'm just saying, that's,
It should have said 8 years and every year after.
Yeah.
There should have been some more language.
It did.
Language
If you also look at the
specificity,
language, it said
And beyond.
2026 and thereafter.
that's not the way it was.
right, but language specificity is what it's all about,
Yes.
Okay,
right?
let's get an answer from the lawyer.
From the lawyer, I could be the way it's been
Well,
going.
hopefully you'll tell us what the lawyer
Yes,
said.
well,
You'll get the bill for it.
Right, yes, absolutely. My recollection of that was correct, that it's not language that could be imposed on this committee. In other words, the school board could not have said to you that this is the language we want you to look at. But it is language that our attorney feels would be appropriate if this committee decided that they wanted to add to it. I also asked the question about whether or not there could be any kind of guarantee that this would stay in effect for the 10 years or 8 years or whatever, and he said, no, that's not something that he would feel you could require. But adding the language that would say it's only good if Nuri agrees to end the process would be acceptable as long as it came from you and wasn't imposed on you from another organization, so, got it right.
But you're saying, David, it wouldn't guarantee a 10-year stop to Nuri trying to withdraw?
You can't require,
You can't
require that. This committee cannot say that
So
this
the
has to stay in
conditions
place.
out there that, or the laws on withdrawal could change and they could become an issue again?
Yeah, there are no guarantees.
Right.
I think that's the thing. You can't tie, my opinion, you can't tie the hands of another municipal government to say, we forbid you, you'll never be able to do this.
Right.
It's if we implement this and it goes forward, it's with the understanding that Nuri will stop the withdrawal process. That's about the limit of what you can, if I understand correctly.
The
The
current
limit, yeah,
withdrawal
limit,
process.
right, the current withdrawal process. Something else, I mean, for example, it would be similar if all of a sudden, one of the other towns decides they want to withdraw. You know, you can't take that legal piece away from them. The issue,
And since
I'll just-
everybody has their hand in it, it also wouldn't stop the state from getting involved again either.
oh, you got that right.
Okay.
Marcel?
Well, I'm very glad to hear that this is a condition that can be put on, because that's a game changer, there's no doubt about it. So that's, but I want to just make sure that everybody's clear on a few things. We have a threat of withdrawal, that's clear. But in order for Nuri to withdraw, there has to be an agreement that is reached, and the voters have to vote on it in Nuri. That has not happened yet, there is no agreement, there is no process for an agreement. So whether we want to continue that, that's something for voters to decide. But what I want to point out again is essentially we're in a unique situation of essentially creating a taxation plan that unfortunately is not done on a comprehensive level at either the federal or the state level. So we have one pair of pants, and from our left front pocket we pay federal taxes, from right front pocket state taxes, in the back pocket we pay property tax, and then there's a sales tax and all the other taxes. And we just, and I can't even begin to try to explain the impacts of the federal tax cuts. But high-end earners had better savings than people at the bottom. And remember, there's still the issue of the middle class disappearing, two families having to work and barely being able to make ends meet, healthcare costs still not being covered. To me, for years, when I was self-employed, my biggest expense was my healthcare. And I was paying at one point 1/3 of my income on healthcare, okay? Because I didn't want to not have healthcare. That, to me, was a tax. So the point of all this is that ultimately, who do we assess taxes on for public education when it's coming out of property tax? businesses who have to make a living to be viable, and second homeowners who are typically higher-end earners, and then, of course, there are people who are on fixed incomes who have lived here, and so if this group decides you're establishing a way of taxing people and shifting taxes, at least to some degree, giving folks in Newry, the second homeowners who comprise 84% of the tax base, you're giving them a tax cut, and you are putting it on mostly primary homeowners, some second homeowners, because we have second homeowners in all the towns. But I just want to make sure everybody knows that we are recreating a tax formula, and ultimately, when you look at your pair of pants, the sum total of your federal taxes, state taxes, and property taxes, where's the burden falling? Mostly. I still would maintain it's mostly falling on the people at the lower end. And we're now going to, if this passes, we're going to increase a little bit. And
one of the things I would just clarify, this committee's suggesting maybe.
correct.
The taxpayers
The taxpayer,
will
correct,
decide
absolutely,
what
absolutely.
they're going to
But-
tax
and-
themselves. I mean, let's not forget
Right.
that.
And I do want to acknowledge, if I didn't say it, I will say it again, withdrawal would be an absolute disaster. There's no doubt about it. But we're not there. We're not at withdrawal, okay?
Yes, sir.
I just think it's really important that people understand that the last proposal and proposal before that, in each of those cases, even though people might not like change, the funding formula that we presented the last time, the time before that, they were all fair tax formulas. Every